Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your curiosity, your research, and your shared source material, and we cut right to the heart of what matters most.
And today's mission is, it's a heavy one.
It really is. We are diving into one of the absolute darkest corners of post-war Japanese history.
We're looking at an ethical collapse so profound, it literally forced the nation to rewrite its laws.
And we're focusing on a single figure, a name that might not be as well known as some others, but whose staggering number of victims, well, it remains absolutely unrivaled.
Unrivaled by any other serial killer in the history of Japan.
And the sources you provided, they meticulously detail this rogues gallery of infamous figures.
Yeah, I mean, you have some truly horrific cases in there.
You got the chilling sadism of Tsutomu Miyazaki, the otaku murderer.
Right, known for these heinous acts of, mutilation, necrophilia, just pure direct malice.
Or the collaborative years-long torture schemes that were engineered by Matsunaga and Ogata.
Exactly. And those cases, as horrific as they are, they involve crimes of direct commission. They were driven by lust or control or just sadism.
But the entry we're focusing on today, it stands apart.
It really does. And it stands apart precisely because the motivation was rooted in this twisted, almost perverse kind of pragmatism.
We're talking about Miyuki Ishikawa.
Infamously dubbed the demon midwife, or Onisanba in Japanese.
And according to some of the analyses in these sources, she's considered the most prolific female serial killer the world has ever seen.
That's right. And her victim count, which we have to stress is a conservative police estimate, it starts at around 85 infants.
85?
But it could easily reach as high as 169.
When you lay that number alongside other notorious global criminals, the scale is it's incomprehensible.
It is. And yet, unlike the others we mentioned, her crimes weren't really defined by active violence in that traditional sense.
She was operating in Tokyo, right, in the late 1940s.
A period of just total devastation following World War II.
So that staggering number and the location, a maternity hospital of all places, it demands that we look beyond just, simple individual malice.
Exactly. Our core mission today is to understand the profound societal, legal, and economic context that not only allowed her operation to thrive,
but ultimately shielded her from the full measure of justice.
Yes. The vacuum that was created by poverty, by these really restrictive laws, and just a completely collapsed social safety net. It was systematically exploited by Ishikawa.
And her methodology was? It was organized.
Calculated and framed, in her own defense no less, as a desperate solution to a national crisis.
Her method, as you noted, was often defined as a system of death by omission.
And that's a crucial legal distinction.
It's a distinction that allowed her to operate for years. So we need to understand not just that she killed, but how that specific legal loophole, rooted in this societal desperation, let her continue unchecked for so long. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the world that created this killer. We really need to reconstruct the environment of Tokyo in the late 1940s that provided the fertile ground for a maternity hospital director to commit industrial mass murder.
To really grasp this, you have to try and envision Japan in, say, 1946.
Okay.
The country had suffered a catastrophic defeat. The Allied bombing campaigns, they hadn't just destroyed infrastructure, they had completely atomized the social contract.
The sources detail a reality of just extreme material scarcity.
And this wasn't just, doing without. This was systemic famine.
Right.
The average caloric intake was dangerously low. Housing was non-existent for so many people who were basically refugees in their own capital city.
And the economic engine was just completely paralyzed. The sources describe rampant unemployment, massive black markets.
And inflation that just wiped out the savings of the entire middle class.
So when the basic physical capacity to feed and shelter your surviving adult population is compromised,
introducing new, completely dependent life becomes an impossible burden.
For millions of people.
Precisely. And this strain, it manifested as a demographic and social crisis. Many families were simply unable to support new children.
And especially those born out of wedlock, which carried a huge social stigma at the time.
A massive stigma. And the sources really emphasize that the social safety net, things like charitable organizations, government support, state-run orphanages, it was utterly and completely non-existent.
So what were people doing?
Women were abandoning infants directly in maternity hospitals or even in the streets because they saw no other viable alternative.
And this wasn't just a failure of resources. It was a failure of the law.
Absolutely.
The sources are so clear that this crisis was profoundly exacerbated by the prevailing legal climate.
Which was that abortion was strictly illegal in Japan until 1948. And it was only really effectively legalized for economic reasons even later.
That legal barrier is the key ingredient, isn't it?
It is. If a desperate family had no financial recourse and no legal recourse to terminate a pregnancy, they were faced with this insurmountable moral and financial dilemma the moment the baby was delivered.
Which created an overwhelming crisis of unwanted infants flooding facilities, just like the Kotobuki San'in.
Exactly.
And what's truly infuriating, based on the materials, is that the government was not operating in ignorance of this.
Oh, not at all. This crisis of institutional neglect and infanticide was known. It had historical precedent.
It was a known endemic societal problem.
Yes. The sources cite cases from decades earlier, long before Ishikawa even started.
Like the 1930 incident in Itabashi?
Where individuals were accused of murdering 41 foster children.
Or the 1933 case of Hatsutora Kawamata.
Arrested for the murder of at least 25 foster children he was supposed to be caring for.
So these weren't just isolated incidents of, back alley crime.
No, they were symptomatic of a deeply rooted systemic failure in child protection.
And the sources explicitly state that despite these glaring precedents, these warnings, the Japanese government did nothing.
Did nothing to legislate protections or establish proper social welfare infrastructure until after Ishikawa's case just completely exploded into the public consciousness.
And it goes back even further, doesn't it? The legal history.
It does. The legal status of newborns was historically tenuous.
How so?
Well, the sources note that prior to 1907, parental infanticide was often classified merely as bodily injury resulting in death under the Criminal Code of Japan.
Wait, bodily injury resulting in death?
Mm-hmm.
That phrasing dramatically minimizes the gravity of killing an infant. Can you unpack that for us?
Mm-hmm.
How did that pre-existing legal idea inform the environment Ishikawa was operating in?
That historical classification is crucial. It really is, because it reflected an earlier societal view of the newborn as being in this state of absolute dependency.
Okay.
And therefore, their right to life was often implicitly conditional on the parent's capacity or willingness to sustain that life.
Especially in times of hardship.
Especially then. Now, while the law had technically evolved by the 1940s, this historical precedent had a lingering cultural and legal residue.
It set a precedent for minimizing the value of a newborn's life when the parents or caregivers were under duress.
Exactly. So when the courts later considered Ishikawa's case, this historical ambiguity about infant rights played a silent but pivotal role.
How so?
It was pivotal in classifying her mass murders as mere omission rather than outright commission.
Distinguishing them from the murder of an established adult or an older child.
Precisely.
So the desperate society, lacking legal options and social support, provided the perfect ethical storm.
And the historical legal context gave a blueprint for minimizing the crime.
Which brings us to Miyuki Ishikawa herself.
Yeah.
Because she was not some desperate figure living on the margins, was she?
Not at all. She was an established professional woman of standing, and that's vital context.
Okay.
She was born in 1897, came from a well-to-do family in Miyazaki Prefecture. She received an excellent education.
Graduating from the University of Tokyo in 1919.
As an experienced, licensed midwife. By the late 1940s, she had the respectability to rise to the position of director of the Kotobuki San'in.
The major maternity hospital located in Shinjuku, Tokyo.
The very one.
She even engaged politically. She ran for the Shinjuku Ward Assembly in 1947, which shows she was fully integrated and aware of the municipal structure she was operating in.
Oh, she was a pillar of the community. Or at least, she was perceived as one.
And her husband, Takeshi Ishikawa, he also contributed to this aura of establishment.
He did. He'd been a former Kenpeitai sergeant, that's the military police, before becoming a civilian police officer.
So that marital connection to law enforcement must have provided a degree of practical immunity.
And a knowledge of how the system worked from the inside.
And then there's this deeply chilling personal contradiction. She was unable to have biological children herself due to a hysterectomy.
Yes, but she and Takeshi, they raised a son from a previous marriage and they adopted 3 other children.
So she understood the effort, the investment, and the love required to raise a child.
While simultaneously managing a hospital facility that she was systematically turning into a death factory for the children that others had rejected.
The source material uses the term quandary to describe the situation she faced as the director.
A quandary due to the overwhelming number of babies, the financially ruined parents, and 0 functional social services.
She was trapped between professional ethics and this overwhelming reality?
But her choice. Her choice was one of radical, organized cruelty.
Her solution was systematic neglect.
Deliberate neglect. She intentionally neglected numerous infants, allowing them to die from starvation, from lack of warmth, or exposure to illness.
So it was death by policy, not by an individual violent act.
Exactly. And that distinction, neglect or abuse, as some sources define it, is the very definition of the crime of omission.
She didn't actively inject them or poison them for the most part.
No, especially not early on. Her crime was failing to provide the legally and professionally mandated standard of care that's required of a midwife and a hospital director.
She weaponized professional incompetence.
She did. She understood that in the fragile, desperate state of these infants, simply withholding basic necessities would result in death quickly.
And crucially, without visible signs of violent assault.
Yes.
This sounds like a moral rot that couldn't possibly have been invisible to everyone around her.
Wow.
How did her own professional staff respond to this?
This is a critical point. It speaks volumes about the moral line she had crossed.
Okay.
The sources reveal that her practices were so abhorrent, they deviated so dramatically from the ethical standards of midwifery, that almost all the other professional midwives employed by the Kotobuki Hospital, they resigned.
They quit.
They resigned in disgust. They chose to abandon their employment rather than participate or, tacitly approve of her system.
Wait a minute. If her trained colleagues are resigning en masse, which is a huge, clear red flag that a standard of care has been violated, how was the local government still blind to this?
Well, this gets back to the point that the local government had a history of ignoring these kinds of infanticide cases.
So what does this say about the lack of municipal oversight in post-war Shinjuku?
It indicates a total failure of oversight, and it was rooted in both bureaucratic collapse and, frankly, a kind of tacit social consent.
What do you mean?
Remember, the government was struggling just to feed the population. The local ward offices likely viewed these maternity hospitals as handling a problem, unwanted children, that they themselves couldn't solve.
So the midwives resigning, that was an internal ethical judgment.
But without an external audit or formal legal complaint, the local administration, which was likely understaffed and completely overwhelmed, could just easily continue looking the other way.
Because the children who died were unwanted.
And this desperate context made their deaths easily rationalized or just dismissed as, a sad product of the times.
And the moment she realized she had this institutional cover, the mercy killing quickly became something far more sinister. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the methodical bureaucratic killing rapidly transformed into a lucrative financial business model.
The transition from neglect as necessity to neglect as profit is what elevates this from just a tragic anomaly to a profound criminal enterprise.
Right.
Ishikawa and Takeshi, her husband, they formalized the process into a financial scheme. They began soliciting substantial sums of money, cooperation funds, they called them, from the distressed parents.
And their pitch, according to the source material, was just chillingly manipulative.
It was.
They didn't just ask for a bribe. They framed it as an economic inevitability.
Arguing that the lump sum payment for their service, which was clearly the service of ensuring the child died, was less than the actual expense of raising these unwanted children over the next decade or two.
They monetized desperation.
They absolutely did. They understood that in an economy crippled by inflation and scarcity, this argument had a perverse financial logic for ruined parents.
The fee guaranteed the problem was solved permanently.
And the parents were released from their legal and moral burden. And Takeshi, with his police background, he was crucial in executing the financial side of it all.
Handling the negotiations, collecting the money.
And ensuring the operation maintained a degree of plausible deniability.
And this wasn't just a husband and wife operation either. They needed a medical accomplice to maintain that veneer of legitimacy.
Yes, the sources identify a doctor, Shiro Nakayama, who was deeply complicit.
What was his role?
Nakayama's role was essential to the conspiracy. He provided the necessary official cover by consistently falsifying death certificates.
So he made it all look legal.
He ensured the cause of death was listed as natural causes, a consequence of poor health or malnutrition, things that were typical of the period, rather than neglect or starvation.
That bureaucratic seal of approval meant the bodies could be legally cremated or buried.
Which shut down any potential municipal investigation before it could even start.
To truly appreciate the scale of this, we need to look at the numbers cited in the source analysis about the Kotobuki San'in.
The data tells a terrifying story. It's the story of a facility that stopped being a hospital and started being a disposal site.
Okay, so let's look at the numbers. Between 1943 and 1948, the infant list at her hospital showed 211 infants passing through their doors.
And during the core period of the criminal enterprise, from 44 to January of 48, 84 burial permits were issued.
If we break down the years right after the war, the ramp-up is stark.
It is.
In 1946, 40 infants are listed, 24 burial permits are issued. The next year, 1947, 100 infants are listed.
And 53 burial permits were issued.
That implies that in 1947 alone, half of all infants entering her facility died and were buried under these highly questionable circumstances.
And the prosecution, when they were trying to build a case that could actually stick in court, they narrowed their focus significantly.
Yeah, they couldn't go for all of them.
No. They claimed the couple were directly responsible for the murder of at least 27 infants out of those 84 deaths that occurred between April 46 and January 48.
But even the prosecution acknowledged the true count was likely far, far higher. And what's most shocking, return to our point on systemic failure, is the explicit confirmation in the sources that the Shinjuku Ward Office,
The municipal body responsible for inspecting and regulating maternity homes.
simply ignored their actions.
That ignorance was the lifeblood of the operation. It highlights this deeply compromised relationship between the administration and the crisis.
The local government was effectively outsourcing the management of the unwanted child crisis to people like Ishikawa.
They prioritized administrative convenience and budget solvency over the protection of infant life, creating the institutional shelter necessary for a serial killer to operate for years with impunity.
That silence from the local government is it's absolutely integral to the tragedy.
It is.
This horrific enterprise, which ran on a system of industrialized death and financial exploitation, it went on until 1948.
When the entire operation finally crumbled.
And it took a simple accident for that to happen.
A complete accident. The entire system was brought down on January 12, 1948. It wasn't the result of a massive government audit or some brave whistleblower.
No. Instead, two police officers from the Waseda station. They accidentally stumbled upon the remains of 5 infants.
And that accidental discovery was the first visible thread that unraveled everything.
Because the deaths had previously been covered up by Dr. Nakayama's falsified certificates, right?
Exactly. So the police were immediately suspicious. Autopsies were conducted, and they definitively confirmed the deaths were not natural.
They were the result of severe neglect and starvation.
Ishikawa and Takeshi were arrested 3 days later on January 15, 1948.
And the immediate aftermath was horrifying proof of the continued system of neglect.
It was. At the moment of their arrest, there were 7 surviving infants still in the maternity home,
But tragically, 2 of those 7 died shortly thereafter.
underlining that even the remaining children were suffering the effects of that deeply negligent environment.
The subsequent investigation then revealed the full, unthinkable scope of it all.
It did. The police found the ashes of over 40 infants hidden at a mortician's house, who was apparently also complicit in the disposal,
And then they discovered 30 more bodies, or sets of ashes.
buried in a temple.
The sources make it clear that the exact death toll, that 85 to 169 number, it remains an approximation.
Because the sheer number of bodies, combined with the passage of time and the systematic cremation, made a precise determination nearly impossible.
I recall the writer Kenji Yamamoto referring to the incident as unbelievable and unbearable.
And it's hard to conceive of the physical reality of recovering dozens upon dozens of infant remains, all victims of one hospital director's policy.
The scale of the recovery forced a national reckoning.
It did, but then came the legal battle, which for many observers was even more disturbing than the crime itself.
Ishikawa's defense strategy was controversial, but chillingly successful.
She insisted that the ultimate responsibility lay with the parents.
She just deflected all the blame.
Completely. She argued that because the victims were deserted children, and because the parents had essentially paid to be rid of them, the mothers and fathers were responsible for their deaths.
She framed herself as merely a facilitator, someone responding to a social imperative.
And what's fascinating here, and what speaks volumes about the desperation of the era, is that the sources confirm there was a degree of public sympathy for her assertion.
Really?
Yes. Figures like the intellectual Muse Tokugawa argued that the victims were already half dead, socially and economically.
So her actions, however criminal, were a response to impossible conditions created by the state.
That was the argument. This public reaction really reflected the shared sense of societal failure.
But that sympathy wasn't universal.
Not at all. The sources highlight how critics, like the writer Yuriko Miyamoto and social commentator Michiko Fujiwara, sharply criticized this viewpoint.
They correctly identified this framing as discrimination against abandoned children.
And they argued vehemently against the idea that a person's right to life should be conditional upon their parents' economic stability or their willingness to care for them.
Despite the public outcry and the documented scale of the horror, the justice system delivered a verdict that just said it. It shocked many.
It really did. In October 1948, the Tokyo District Court's initial sentence was extremely lenient.
Ishikawa received 8 years.
And Takeshi and Dr. Nakayama received 4 years each. But the leniency deepened drastically on appeal.
Right. The Tokyo High Court appeal in 1952 further reduced the sentences.
Ishikawa's final sentence was just 4 years in prison.
4 years. And Takeshi's was reduced to 2. For potentially 169 victims, 4 years in prison is almost unthinkable.
It is. And the sources are definitive on this. This sentence remains unrivaled by any other serial killer in Japan for its brevity relative to the sheer magnitude of the crimes.
So this is the legal nucleus of the case. Why? Why was the sentence so light?
The primary legal rationale was the classification of her crimes as homicides by omission.
Specifically, negligent homicide or involuntary manslaughter.
Right, rather than deliberate premeditated murder, which is homicide by commission.
Can you elaborate on how that legal distinction saved her from a much harsher sentence? For our listeners, what was the mechanism the court used to justify the sheer difference between killing one child by omission versus 169?
Well, the law treats a crime of omission failing to act when you're legally obligated to, like a caregiver neglecting their duty, very differently from a crime of commission.
Which is an active, overt act to cause death, like poisoning or strangulation.
Exactly. For premeditated murder, the penalty is severe. For negligent homicide, penalties are substantially lower.
So the court accepted the argument that her primary crime was the failure to perform her duties as a midwife.
Combined with the exploitation scheme, rather than a malicious intent to end life directly through violence.
Oh, wow.
And furthermore, the court tacitly acknowledged the deserted children status.
So they bought her defense, to a degree.
To a degree. By agreeing that society had failed these families, and that the babies were in dire circumstances when they entered the facility, the court saw her crime as a distorted response to a massive societal problem, not just pure individual malice.
It is a societal tragedy prosecuted as a minor institutional failure.
That's a good way to put it. The judge essentially ruled that the system was partially to blame, and therefore the primary executor of that system shouldn't face the harshest penalty.
So the law bent, because survival and economic desperation had temporarily eclipsed fundamental ethical considerations in that post-war environment.
It did.
That perspective is truly horrifying, that the law implicitly accepted the premise that the lives of unwanted children held less legal weight.
Yes.
So, moving from the crime and the killer to the aftermath, the case of the demon midwife was this devastating mirror, reflecting Japan's social despair.
But it was also a powerful, immediate catalyst for legislative change.
The government could no longer look away.
No. The sources confirm the profound legislative impact. The overwhelming crisis of unwanted infants, laid bare by the discovery of dozens of bodies, is considered the principal reason the Japanese government finally moved to consider legalizing abortion.
And the response was rapid.
Incredibly rapid. Just months after Ishikawa's arrest, the government acted.
The Eugenic Protection Law was established on July 13, 1948.
Now, while that initial law had some roots in addressing hereditary conditions, its implementation was fundamentally accelerated and shaped by the Ishikawa case.
And the pivotal moment came less than a year later.
On June 24, 1949, the law was revised to explicitly legalize abortion for economic reasons.
Which was a direct, systemic attempt to provide that ethical escape hatch that had been missing in the post-war desperation.
Exactly. The government realized that by denying legal, safe reproductive choices, they were inadvertently creating a black market for death that could lead to industrialized atrocities like the one at the Kotobuki San'in.
And beyond abortion reform, the incident forced professional reform too.
Absolutely. The incident demonstrated that professional standards in midwifery had been completely corrupted.
So the new law included provisions establishing a national examination system for midwives.
Yes, mandating professional safeguards, ensuring that individuals in such sensitive, life-critical roles met stringent requirements and were less likely to commit such profound ethical breaches in the future.
And crucially, Ishikawa wasn't the sole aberration.
No, and this is a point that cannot be overstated. The sources reveal the true systemic rot of the time.
By the end of 1948, investigations revealed that 11 other maternity homes in Tokyo were found to have committed similar crimes.
Similar crimes of neglect and exploitation.
11 other homes.
So Ishikawa was the most prolific, the world's worst in this terrible category, but her actions were tragically widespread. She was the symptom and the most horrific example of a societal disease.
The existence of 11 other facilities involved in similar crimes proves that the failure wasn't just individual malice.
It was a systemic failure of health, social, and legal policy.
So what this case synthesizes, then, is the profound ethical contradiction of a society under extreme duress. Where does the individual malice of Ishikawa end and the societal desperation begin?
The line between mercy and murder was not just blurred, it was violently erased.
And the economic incentive solidified the criminality.
It did. The fact that the court minimized the sentence demonstrates that society itself struggled to assign full legal blame to the killer because it recognized its own complicity in creating the conditions.
The system allowed violence to be laundered as necessity.
Making the state, through its inaction, an accomplice to mass murder.
And yet, after this profound failure of justice, Ishikawa went on to live a full life, completely unrepentant, while her victims were nameless and unacknowledged beyond the trial.
That's the final chilling irony. After serving her radically reduced sentence, Miyuki Ishikawa reappeared in public life,
In 1969, she was interviewed by Shukan Shinshu magazine.
where she maintained her denial, continuing to claim innocence in the murders. She never acknowledged the sheer scale of the lives she had extinguished.
And she didn't just retreat into obscurity. The sources reveal she entered a completely different, highly lucrative field.
Yeah, after initially trying her hand at selling soap and fish, she shifted to real estate in post-war Tokyo.
A booming market fueled by reconstruction and economic revival.
And she was highly successful. Her former lawyer estimated she earned around 100 million yen in the real estate business.
She successfully converted her infamy into wealth.
She leveraged the booming post-war economy to create a comfortable, prosperous life, maintaining a presence in the real estate industry until late 1986.
And the final grotesque detail. She openly boasted about having built a large tomb for herself before her death in 1987.
She built a permanent marker for herself, having denied permanent markers for dozens, perhaps hundreds, of her infant victims.
The chilling longevity of her impact and her successful post-crime life reveal a terrifying truth.
Her name, associated with the Kotobuki San'in address, remained listed in Tokyo telephone directories between 1954 and 1987.
She remained a visible, active member of society.
And her 4-year sentence, given the sheer scale of her crimes, which she refused to ever fully acknowledge, stands as a monument to how a society in crisis can completely devalue the lives of the poor and the abandoned.
So what does this all mean?
This case is a stark historical document. It proves that the failure to establish adequate child protection laws and social services in a time of crisis can have devastating and industrialized consequences.
When life is cheapened by economic desperation.
The ethical collapse will occur precisely within the institutions meant to protect that life.
This raises an important question.
The Demon Midwife story is not just about a single killer who holds the title of the world's most prolific female serial killer, but about how a desperate society can create a perverse incentive for murder. When laws and social safety nets collapse, how much of the violence that follows is truly individual malice driven by greed, and how much is societal desperation given a wicked, profit-driven opportunity?
That's something for you to mull over as you reflect on the fragility of ethics during periods of intense national crisis. A profound and deeply disturbing deep dive into the darkest corner of post-war Japanese legal and social history. Thank you for sharing these incredibly detailed sources with us. We'll see you next time.